Victoria Lane laughed a sharp champagne-soaked laugh and plucked Nathan's phone right out of his hand. "Claire again," she said, reading the screen with a smirk. "She calls more than my mother." Nathan didn't stop her. He watched Victoria press the button. Block caller. She handed the phone back like she'd done him a favor, and Nathan actually smiled. 20 miles away, his 8-month pregnant wife slid down the kitchen wall and hit the floor phone still in her hand, a stack of financial documents scattering across the tile around her documents that could have saved everything he was about to lose. If this story stays with you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very last word, because you will not believe where this ends. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Nathan Whitmore had a gift for making things look easy. That was what people always said about him at industry events, at charity dinners, at the kind of functions where men shook hands too firmly and women smiled too carefully. He made building a company look effortless. He made wealth look natural on him, like something he'd been born wearing rather than something he'd clawed toward for 15 years. He had the jawline for it, the posture for it, the voice that filled a room without ever raising itself. People looked at Nathan Whitmore and saw success in its purest, most uncomplicated form. What they did not see, what he made sure they did not see, was Claire. Not because Claire wasn't worth seeing. Claire Whitmore was brilliant in ways Nathan had stopped bothering to acknowledge somewhere around year 4 of their marriage. She had a mind that moved sideways when everyone else's moved straight. She could walk into a problem that had stalled a team of accountants for 3 weeks and come out the other side with a solution that was so simple it made the accountants feel quietly embarrassed. She had that rare kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just quietly fixes things while other people are still arguing about how broken they are. She was also 8 months pregnant, and standing in the kitchen of the house Nathan had bought but she had made into a home, she was holding a phone that kept going straight to his voicemail. "Nathan, it's me. Please call me back when you get this." She left the first message at 7:42 in the evening. Her voice was calm. That was the thing about Claire. She had trained herself through years of being married to a man who read emotion as inconvenience to keep her voice extremely calm, even when her hands were shaking. Her hands were shaking. She set the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked again at the documents spread across the table. She had found them that afternoon while going through the household filing cabinet, looking for the car insurance paperwork, because Nathan's assistant had asked her to scan and email it over. It was the kind of small domestic errand he routed through her, without thinking, the same way he routed the grocery orders and the plumber appointments and the RSVPs to events he couldn't be bothered to respond to himself. She had found the insurance paperwork. And underneath it, in a folder with no label, she had found something else entirely. Bank transfer records, internal company memos, a series of wire transfers, each one slightly under a reporting threshold, cycling through accounts she didn't recognize under names. She almost recognized names that were close to legitimate vendors, but not quite the way a forged signature is close to a real one, but slightly wrong in a way you feel before you can name it. Claire had sat at that kitchen table for 40 minutes without moving. Then she had picked up her phone and called her husband. He didn't answer. She called again. Voicemail. She texted Nathan, "I need you to call me. It's important." She watched the message deliver. She watched it sit there unread. She called a third time. This time it rang twice and went to voicemail, which meant he'd seen her name and declined the call. She knew the difference. She had learned the difference over years of being someone he screened. "Nathan," she kept her voice level, "I found something in the house files. I need to talk to you tonight. This is not about us. This is about the company. Please call me back." She hung up and pressed her palm flat against her stomach, feeling the familiar shifting weight of the baby, the small, insistent presence that had become both her greatest comfort and the thing that made all of this feel most terrifyingly urgent. She needed Nathan to answer the phone, not because she wanted a conversation. She needed him to answer the phone because what she had found in that folder was the kind of thing that, if it reached the wrong people before he had a chance to respond to it, would end everything. At the rooftop restaurant, Nathan was on his 3rd glass of champagne. The place was called Altitude, because of course it was, and it was exactly the kind of establishment that existed primarily so that wealthy people could look down on the city they lived in while spending money on food that arrived in very small portions. Nathan had a reserved table near the railing. The city of Boston spread out below them in autumn lights, and Victoria Lane was wearing a dress the color of expensive everything. Victoria Lane was 29 years old and operated a lifestyle brand on social media that had 4 million followers and no discernible product. What she sold, essentially, was the impression of a life, the photographs of first-class seats and sunset balconies and restaurant tables that cost more than most people's car payments. She sold the dream of access, and she was very good at it because she was genuinely beautiful and genuinely charming, and she understood with a kind of cold, instinctual precision exactly which people could be useful to her and exactly how long she needed to be warm to them before she could collect. She had identified Nathan Whitmore 8 months ago at a tech conference in New York. She had made herself necessary to him within 3 weeks. She had become his mistress within 6. "You're distracted," Victoria said, now swirling her glass, watching him over the rim with the particular expression she kept in reserve for moments when she needed to reclaim his full attention, an expression that managed to be simultaneously amused and slightly wounded, like a woman who finds your inattention charming but is beginning to question whether she should. "My phone," Nathan said, and he did sound annoyed. Not worried. Annoyed. Victoria glanced at the phone on the table. Claire's name was on the screen. "Again?" she said. "She's been calling all night." "How many times? 4 or 5, I don't know. I declined a couple." Victoria set her glass down with a small, deliberate click. She tilted her head slightly to the right, which was the gesture she used when she was about to say something she wanted to sound spontaneous, but had actually calculated. "Nathan, can I ask you something honestly?" He looked at her. This was another thing she understood about men like Nathan Whitmore. They believed themselves to be rare among men in their capacity for honesty. Ask them if you can be honest with them, and they will lean forward. Nathan leaned forward. "Do you remember the last time you had a night like this?" Victoria continued, "without the interruptions, without feeling like you owed someone something. Just this, just good, just easy." I was quiet for a moment. Across the city, Claire was calling again. The phone lit up. His jaw tightened. "She's always calling," he said. "Every night. Nathan, the doctor said. Nathan, can you come home? Like I'm not working 16-hour days to give her the life she has. Like I'm supposed to be home by 7, holding her hand every single night." Victoria listened with exactly the right expression, sympathetic without being pitying, engaged without being pushy. She had heard this particular speech before, or versions of it. Men who cheated almost always had a version of this speech ready. It was the version where the person they were betraying became the one who was unreasonable. "She doesn't see how hard you work," Victoria said. "She doesn't see anything. She just needs and needs and needs." The phone lit up again. Victoria reached across the table and picked it up. She looked at it for a moment long enough that Nathan watched her curious, and then she turned it toward him with a small smile that managed to be both sympathetic and just slightly mocking. "One night," she said. "You deserve one night where you're not managing someone else's emotions. Just one night where you choose yourself." She paused. Her thumb hovered. "Do you want me to?" He should have said no. He should have taken the phone, stepped away from the table, called his wife back, and listened to whatever she was trying to tell him. Later, Nathan Whitmore would replay this moment 10,000 times. He would interrogate every second of it. He would try to identify the precise point where he could have chosen differently. And every single time he would arrive at the same terrible conclusion he knew. Some small part of him knew that Claire was not calling because she was lonely or needy or afraid of being alone. Claire did not call like that. Claire only called when something was real. He knew. And he let Victoria press the button anyway. Block caller. The phone went silent. Victoria set it back on the table and lifted her champagne glass. "There," she said. "Now it's just us." Nathan smiled. He took a drink. Across the table, Victoria's expression settled into something that, if he'd been paying attention to the right things, might have looked less like warmth and more like the quiet satisfaction of someone who has just cleared an obstacle from a road she intended to take by herself. The documents Claire had found were not complicated once you knew what you were looking at, but you had to know what you were looking at. Claire knew because before she became Nathan Whitmore's wife and the manager of his household, and the woman who fielded his assistant's calls about car insurance, she had spent 4 years as a financial analyst at a private equity firm in Boston. She had been good at it, genuinely, seriously good at it. The kind of good where your colleagues stopped being casually dismissive about 6 months in because they'd watched you find something in a quarterly report that the senior partners had missed. She had left the firm when Nathan's company started growing, and he needed someone he trusted at his side, someone who understood numbers the way he understood people. She had given up a career she was exceptional at to help him build his. She sat at the kitchen table now and spread the documents out in order. The first set of records were internal transfer authorizations funds, moving from a subsidiary account to a holding company called Vesta Capital Management. Vesta had no website. Vesta had no registered address that matched anything legitimate. But the authorization signatures on the transfers were real. She recognized the secondary signatory immediately. Marcus Webb, Nathan's business partner and CFO, whose signature she had seen on a dozen legitimate documents over the years. The second set of records were account statements she recognized as belonging to a personal trust she hadn't known existed. The trust had received 11 wire transfers over 14 months. The transfers ranged from $80,000 to $420,000, total just under $3 million. The third item in the folder was not a financial document, it was a photograph. Printed on regular paper, like someone had needed to keep a copy of something they'd seen on a screen. It showed a woman at what looked like a business meeting, a conference table formal setting, the kind of photograph you might find in a corporate newsletter. The woman was Victoria Lane. Claire had not known Victoria Lane's name before she found this photograph. She had suspected, in the way wives sometimes do, that there was a woman. There is a particular quality to a husband's increasing absence, not just the physical absences, but the emotional ones, the way his attention develops a redirection, the way he stops quite meeting your eyes. She had known in her body before she'd known in her mind, but she had not had a name. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at the document clipped to the back of it, a registration record showing Victoria Lane as the beneficial owner of a company called Laneway Holdings LLC Incorporated 9 months ago. Laneway Holdings LLC was the parent company of Vesta Capital Management. The woman her husband was spending his evenings with had, through a chain of shell companies elegant enough to take 3 separate looks to follow, received nearly $3 million from Nathan's company over the past 14 months. The transfers had been authorized by Marcus Webb, whose relationship with Victoria, there had to be a relationship, this could not have happened, otherwise she had not yet been able to trace. But it was there. She could feel the shape of it even where she couldn't see it yet. She called Nathan for the 6th time, straight to voicemail. She called Marcus Webb. No answer. She called Nathan's personal attorney, a careful man named Douglas Park, who had handled the company's contracts for years, and left a message asking him to call her back first thing in the morning, saying only that it was urgent and that she needed his guidance on something she had found. Then she stood up from the table carefully, because her body these days required more management than it used to, and moved toward the kitchen counter to make herself a glass of water, because the documents and the photograph and the knowledge of what she was holding had made her mouth completely dry. She was halfway across the kitchen when the room tilted. Not metaphorically, literally. The floor came up toward her so fast she didn't have time to catch herself. Her neighbor, Patricia Osman, was 63 years old, and the kind of woman who had decided in her 50s to stop spending energy on indifference. Patricia noticed things. Patricia checked in. Patricia had been watching Claire's lights the way people watch weather, when there's reason to be cautious, and when she saw the kitchen light flick, and then heard something that sounded like a hard fall through the wall. They shared, these were old homes, walls with memories. She did not wait. She had a key to the Whitmore house. Claire had given it to her 3 months ago, before Nathan had even known she'd done it, and Patricia had understood exactly why without being told. She let herself in through the side entrance and found Claire on the kitchen floor. Claire was conscious barely, and barely was the word that mattered. She was trying to push herself up, and her arms weren't cooperating, and the documents were everywhere around her, and the phone was lying 2 feet from her outstretched hand. "Oh, honey," Patricia said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has already decided that all action comes first and all other things come later. She called 911 before she was fully across the kitchen. She had Claire's hand by the time the dispatcher answered. She stayed on the line while she moved the documents away from around Claire's body, not knowing what they were, but knowing they mattered from the way Claire's eyes kept going to them, and she piled them carefully on the table and put Claire's phone on top of the pile. "Don't worry about those," Patricia said to Claire, who was saying something about Nathan, about the phone, about something she needed him to know. "Honey, right now, the only thing that matters is you. You hear me? Just breathe." The paramedics arrived in 9 minutes. In the ambulance, Claire kept trying to reach for her phone. The paramedic, a young man with calm hands, said, "Ma'am, I need you to focus on your breathing." "My husband," Claire said. "We'll contact him." "He blocked my number," she said. And the way she said it, not with anger, not with tears, just with a kind of exhausted matter-of-factness, was the sentence that Patricia Osmond, sitting in the jump seat of the ambulance because she had announced she was coming, and no one had thought to argue with her, would never forget for the rest of her life. "He blocked my number." Patricia looked at Claire's face, pale and damp, and absolutely certain of what she was saying, and she felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a word for at the time, but later would recognize as the specific grief that comes from watching someone state an unbearable truth with total calm, because they have long since gotten past the stage of being shocked by it. At altitude, the champagne was still cold, and Victoria was laughing at something Nathan had said, one of those easy laughs that arrives precisely on cue and says exactly the right thing without ever being quite genuine. Nathan leaned back in his chair, for the first time in months, maybe longer. If he was honest about it, he felt completely relaxed. No obligations pulling at him, no one needing something. Just the city lights and the good champagne, and a woman who thought he was exceptional and told him so consistently enough that he had started to mistake it for the truth. "Tell me something," he said in the expansive way of a man who is feeling very good about himself. "What did you want to be when you were a kid?" Victoria smiled. It was an excellent smile. "Are we doing that, getting deep? Humor me." She looked out at the city. She appeared to be thinking about it. Nathan watched her profile and felt not for the first time that particular dangerous confusion between admiration and trust, the feeling that because someone is beautiful and attentive and interesting, they must also be safe. "I wanted to be someone people remembered," Victoria said. "You are," he said. She turned back to him, and the smile changed in a way he couldn't quite name. "I'm getting there," she said. His phone face up on the table began to vibrate again, but it wasn't Claire this time. The name on the screen was Douglas Park, Nathan's attorney. Nathan frowned. It was nearly 9 o'clock on a Thursday. Douglas Park did not call at 9 o'clock on a Thursday. "I should take this," he said. Victoria's expression did not change, but something in her went very still. Nathan stood from the table and stepped toward the railing, lifting the phone to his ear. "Douglas, what's—" "Nathan." Douglas Park's voice had a texture Nathan had never heard in it before. Douglas was a careful man who weighed every word before he let it leave his mouth. Nathan had always found it slightly maddening, but right now he sounded like a man who has abandoned the habit of weighing because the situation has made all caution irrelevant. "I got a voicemail from Claire this evening. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "What kind of question?" "Have you had any knowledge of fund transfers out of the Whitmore Technology subsidiary accounts in the last 14 months? Any authorizations? Any awareness of—" "What are you talking about?" "I'm going to need you to tell me where you are right now, Nathan." "I'm at dinner. Why are you—" "Nathan." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to change the temperature of the conversation. "Claire is on her way to Massachusetts General Hospital. She collapsed at the house tonight. I got her voicemail about an hour ago, and I've been trying to reach you." The city lights below him did not change. The sound of the restaurant did not change. But Nathan Whitmore's face changed completely, and Victoria Lane, watching him from across the table, saw it happen. "The baby," Nathan said. "I don't know the details yet. I only know what the neighbor told the hospital, which is that Claire was found on the kitchen floor by herself." Douglas's voice carried the weight of the unspoken, the specific emphasis on alone. "I also know she was trying to reach you tonight, multiple times." Nathan turned from the railing. He looked at Victoria. She was sitting with her champagne glass held loosely in one hand, and her expression arranged into something that she clearly intended as concern. But Nathan was looking at her differently now, with the sudden altered vision of someone who has just received information that has changed the context of everything around them. He noticed the stillness that had come into her when he'd said he needed to take the call. He noticed the way her eyes had tracked to the phone before he'd even answered. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said to Douglas. He ended the call. He stood at the table and picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and did not say anything. "Is everything okay?" Victoria asked. "My wife is in the hospital." "Oh, Nathan, I'm sure she's—" "She called me tonight, Victoria." He said it quietly. He said it looking directly at her face. She called me 6 times and I blocked her number, and she was on the kitchen floor alone and no one... He stopped. He pressed his hand flat against his chest like he was checking for something. I have to go. Of course, Victoria said. Smooth, easy. Go be with her. We can talk tomorrow. Nathan nodded. He was already moving toward the exit. He did not see the expression that settled onto Victoria Lane's face once his back was turned. It was not concern. It was not grief. It was the particular expression of someone who is running a calculation and finding so far that the numbers are still working in their favor. He drove too fast. He knew he was driving too fast, and he did it anyway because the alternative was sitting inside the fact of what he had done, the fact of his wife calling him 6 times of the number being blocked of Claire on the kitchen floor while he drank champagne, and he was not yet ready to fully inhabit that fact. He ran 2 red lights he would not remember running. He parked in the emergency bay and left the car and ran. The hospital at night has a particular quality, the fluorescent wash of it, the constant low machinery of critical function, continuing, regardless of what any given person is feeling, the way the front desk staff look at you when you arrive at a run and say your wife's name with too much urgency. Claire Whitmore, he said. She was brought in, I don't know what time, maybe an hour ago. The woman at the desk was already typing. She looked at the screen. She looked at him. Are you the husband? Yes. Nathan Whitmore. I'm her husband. A pause that lasted slightly too long. Let me get someone to come out and speak with you, she said. That pause, that exact pause. Nathan had never been in a hospital for a personal reason. Nothing in his life had required it. He had been until now the kind of person whose health and whose family's health had been a reliable backdrop in absence of crisis, and he did not know the language of hospital pauses yet. He did not know that the pause meant the information is not mine to give you, which is different from the information being bad, but which also is not definitively the information being fine. He sat in a chair. He took out his phone. He went to Claire's name in his contacts. He stared at the label that said blocked. He pressed unblock with a feeling like pulling a knife out of his own chest. Then he sat there in the terrible fluorescent light of the waiting room and counted the calls he had missed. 6. A text, Nathan, I need you to call me. It's important. A voicemail that he listened to now with the phone pressed so hard against his ear that it left a mark. Nathan, I found something in the house files. I need to talk to you tonight. This is not about us. This is about the company. Please call me back. He sat very still. The company. He played it again and again, listening to her voice, not panicked, not tearful, just exact. Precise. The voice of a woman stating facts. This is about the company. He thought about the call from Douglas. Fund transfers, subsidiary accounts. Have you had any knowledge? He thought about Victoria's hand reaching across the table, picking up his phone with such easy confidence. He thought, why would she be confident? A doctor came through the doors and looked at him. Mr. Whitmore. Nathan stood up. Your wife is in surgery, the doctor said. We want to be straightforward with you. The baby is coming early. She's at 34 weeks and the delivery is going to... Is she going to be okay? He heard his voice come out wrong, too high. Are they both going to... We have an excellent team with her right now. That's the truest thing I can tell you. Nathan sat back down. The doctor said more things, necessary things, clinical things. Nathan heard them. He also heard underneath them the voicemail playing again in his memory. This is not about us. This is about the company. He thought about the 14 months Douglas had mentioned. I thought about the name Vesta, which he had never heard, and which Douglas had asked about with the particular careful specificity of a man who had already heard about it somewhere. He thought about Victoria, who had been in his life for 8 months. He sat in the chair in the waiting room in the fluorescent light, and something began to collapse inside him, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the slow, terrible certainty of a structure that has been compromised for much longer than anyone realized, finally beginning to show the weight of what it has been carrying. Because the call he had blocked was not the call of a woman who wanted attention. It was the call of a woman who had found the evidence. And somewhere in this city, in a life built partly on his money and partly on his trust and partly on the particular cruelty of someone who had never intended to love him. Victoria Lane was sitting with her phone, his contacts, his calendar, his access and running numbers that were still so far working in her favor. Claire had known. Claire had tried to tell him. and he had pressed a button. Patricia Osmond sat in the corridor outside the surgical unit with Claire's phone and the documents she had thought to bring in her purse because someone had to, because no one else was going to, because the kind of woman Patricia had decided to become in her 50s was the kind who brought the things that matter when no one else thinks to. She did not know what the documents meant, but she knew what Claire had said in the ambulance. He blocked my number. And she sat there in the corridor, holding the stack of papers, waiting for whoever needed them, understanding with the complete clarity of someone who has lived long enough to recognize consequence when she sees it arrive, that what was unfolding tonight was not the beginning of something. It was the end. And everything that came next would be built on the choices that had already been made, on the button that had already been pressed, on the silence that a man had chosen because a beautiful woman told him he deserved one night of peace. The phone in Patricia's lap lit up. A notification. An appy one of those financial news alerts that Claire apparently had set up on her phone, pulsing with a headline about a technology company in Massachusetts currently under preliminary inquiry by federal financial investigators. Patricia read the headline. She read it again. She looked down the corridor toward the surgical doors, and she held the documents a little tighter. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Nathan knew this because he counted. He sat in that waiting room chair, and he counted every minute the way a man counts when he has nothing left to do with his hands and his mind refuses to go quiet. And the only alternative to counting is thinking, really thinking about what he had done. 4 hours, 11 minutes. 251 minutes, during which his wife was behind a set of doors he could not open, carrying a child who had not been ready to arrive in a crisis that had begun while he was drinking champagne and letting another woman block her number. He did not drink the coffee a nurse brought him. He did not respond to the text from his mother, who had somehow found out and was on her way from Providence. He sat in the chair and he counted, and he listened to Claire's voicemail 17 times until he had every word of it memorized. Nathan, I found something in the house files. I need to talk to you tonight. This is not about us. This is about the company. Please call me back. The company. He had started to understand in the hours since Douglas Park's call that those 2 words were the most important thing anyone had said to him in a very long time. Not because of what they revealed, because of what they proved. Claire had found something that threatened everything he had built, and her first instinct had not been to confront him, had not been to protect herself. Her first instinct had been to reach him before anyone else did, to give him time to respond, to stand between him and the consequences of something she hadn't even caused. He pressed his hands flat against his knees. He thought about the way Victoria had reached across the table. Easy, natural, like she had done it before, like the phone was already something she had some right to. He thought about Douglas saying 14 months. Victoria had been in his life for 8. Someone had been moving money for 14 months. At 2:47 in the morning, the surgical doors opened and a doctor came through them with her mask pulled down around her neck and the expression of someone who is about to deliver complicated news and wants to organize it correctly before she speaks. Nathan was on his feet before she reached him. "Your wife is stable," the doctor said. He felt something break open in his chest. Not relief, not quite relief yet, because the doctor's voice had a second half that hadn't arrived. "And the baby. Your son is in the NICU. He's small. 34 weeks is manageable. We have every reason to expect a good outcome. But I want to be honest with you about what the next days look like." Nathan nodded. He was hearing her. He was also hearing the word son, which he had known was coming for 8 months, and which still hit him somewhere completely undefended. "Can I see her?" "She's in recovery. She'll be in and out for another hour or 2. But yes, you can sit with her." He followed the doctor through the doors and down a corridor and into a room, and the first thing he noticed was how still Claire was. She was always in motion, even reading, even sleeping. There was something kinetic about her, some low-frequency energy of a mind that never fully turned off, and now she was absolutely still, and the stillness was the most frightening thing he had seen all night. He sat in the chair beside her bed. He did not touch her hand. He didn't feel he had earned that yet. He sat beside her and looked at her face and thought about the woman she was. The woman he had somewhere along the way stopped bothering to see, and something that had been hardening in his chest for years began very slowly in the silence of that recovery room to come apart. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, just checking you're okay. Let me know if you need anything. Here for you." He stared at the message. He turned his phone face down on his knee. He did not respond. Patricia Osman arrived at the room 40 minutes later, which Nathan would later learn was because no one had told her she couldn't. She had simply walked in with the authority of a woman who has decided she belongs somewhere, and the night staff, recognizing something immovable in her posture, had let her through. She stopped when she saw Nathan. The look she gave him was not warm. It was the look of a woman who had ridden in an ambulance next to his unconscious wife, who had held Claire's hand while the paramedics worked, who had heard 3 words. He blocked my number and filed them in a place inside herself where she put things she did not intend to forget. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "You were with her," he said, "at the house. I heard her fall through the wall." She set a large canvas tote bag on the chair beside the door. "I brought the documents she had on the table, and her phone. I didn't know what they were, but she kept trying to get to them on the floor, so—" She paused. "I figured they mattered." Nathan looked at the bag. "Thank you," he said, "for being there." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Claire. Something in her face shifted, not softening exactly, but reorganizing around the reality of the room. "She's a good woman," Patricia said quietly. "She's been a good woman the whole time I've known her." She left without saying anything else. Nathan reached into the bag and pulled out the documents. He had not looked at them yet. Douglas had told him not to touch anything until they spoke in the morning, but Douglas was not in this room, and the morning felt very far away, and the documents were in his hands. He started reading. By the time Claire's eyes opened just before 5 in the morning, Nathan had been through every page twice. He was sitting forward in the chair with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. He heard the change in her breathing, a shift from deep to shallow, from under to surface, and he looked up. Claire's eyes were open, tracking the ceiling, doing the slow reassembly of someone returning from anesthesia. She didn't move her head at first, just her eyes taking inventory of the room. Then she turned and saw him. She looked at him for a very long time without speaking. "Hey!" he finally said. His voice came out wrong, roughened by hours of silence and something that wasn't quite crying, but was its close neighbor. "The baby," Claire said. Her voice was almost nothing. "He's okay. He's in the NICU. The doctor says he's doing well for 34 weeks. Her eyes closed, opened again. He. Nathan swallowed. "We have a son." Something moved across her face. Not a smile, she was too exhausted and too medicated for a smile, but the precursor to one, the internal event, before the outward expression. Her hand moved on the bed just slightly. Nathan looked at her hand. He reached out and covered it with his. She didn't pull away. She also didn't grip his hand back. She just let it be there. "I found documents," she said. "I know, I read them." She turned her head to look at him fully. Her eyes, even dulled by exhaustion and medication, had that quality. He had always struggled to name the quality of seeing exactly what was in front of them, and not one thing more or less. "All of it," she said. "All of it." A pause. "Victoria Lane," she said. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "How long have you known her?" He could have deflected. He could have said, now wasn't the time, could have pointed to the hospital room and the recovery and the son in the NICU as reasons to postpone the conversation. He had been deflecting for years. He was extraordinarily good at it. He said 8 months. Claire closed her eyes. "The transfer started 14 months ago," she said. "I know. That means someone else started it before you met her." She was thinking out loud, her mind doing what it always did, moving sideways, finding the angle no one else was approaching from. "Marcus Webb." "I think so." "They were working together. She found you on purpose, Nathan. She needed someone in the company who didn't know someone whose name and signature and credibility she could stand behind while Webb moved the money. You were cover." He heard what she was saying. He also heard everything beneath it, the thing she was not saying, which was that she had worked all this out while on the kitchen floor, while calling a phone that went to voicemail, while collapsing alone in a house she managed, and he paid for, and neither of them had truly lived in together for a long time. "Claire, don't." Her voice was quiet and completely steady. "Not right now. I can't do that conversation right now." He nodded. He kept his hand on hers. Neither of them spoke for a few minutes. The room had its own sounds, the monitors, the ventilation, the distant motion of the hospital continuing its perpetual work, and they sat inside those sounds together, which was the closest they had been in months. "Douglas Park," Claire said eventually. He needs to see those documents before anyone else does. I'll call him at 7. Not at 7. Call him now. Nathan looked at the clock on the wall. 5:14 in the morning. It's 5 in the morning, Claire. Nathan. She turned to look at him again. If Marcus Webb finds out that I found those documents, and if Victoria knows what I knew when I called you last night, they will have already started moving things. Every hour matters. She paused. Call Douglas now. He called Douglas at 5:17 in the morning. Douglas answered on the second ring, which meant he had not been asleep either. I have the documents, Nathan said. Claire had them. Her neighbor brought them to the hospital. Silence on the line. Then, Nathan, I need to ask you something very directly. Did you have any knowledge of these transfers prior to tonight? No. You're certain? I am absolutely certain. Then listen to me carefully. Do not contact Marcus Webb. Do not contact Victoria Lane. Do not discuss this with anyone except me. I'm going to make 2 calls in the next 20 minutes, and we're going to get ahead of this before the business day starts. Can you get me those documents? Patricia Osmond, Claire's neighbor, she brought them to the hospital. They're here with me. Good. Do not let them out of your sight. I'll send someone to the hospital in 2 hours. A pause. Nathan, how is Claire? She's going to be okay. And the baby, NICU, but the doctor thinks... He stopped, organized himself. They think he'll be all right. Thank God. Douglas's voice, normally a model of professional restraint, carried something genuine. I'll be in touch. Nathan ended the call. He turned back to Claire, who had heard the entire thing from 3 feet away. He's good, Nathan said. I know he's good, Claire said. I called him last night. There was something in the way she said it, not accusatory, just exact, that landed in Nathan's chest like something falling from a height. She had called Douglas last night, after calling Nathan 6 times. She had kept going, kept trying to get the information to someone who could use it, even as the situation in her body was becoming critical. She had not given up. She had not stopped. She had just kept doing the next right thing alone in the house, on the kitchen floor, in the ambulance. He thought about Victoria saying she doesn't see anything. She just needs and needs and needs. I thought about how completely wrong that was, how spectacularly, catastrophically wrong it was, how the woman he had described as needy had spent the last 14 months quietly holding the household together while he was absent managing the details of his life with no acknowledgement, and then spent her last hours before collapse trying to protect his company, and then managed from a hospital recovery bed at 5 in the morning to direct him to make the right call to the right person at the right time. He felt sick. Not the abstract nausea of guilt, but the physical, concrete nausea of someone who has been confronted with the exact distance between the story he was telling himself and the actual truth. He had called her needy. He had let someone block her number. She had been carrying his entire life on her back, and he had been sitting at a rooftop restaurant feeling free. Claire had fallen back into a light sleep. Nathan sat beside her and looked at his phone. He had 11 texts he hadn't responded to. His mother, his sister, 3 people from the company, and a string from Victoria that had continued arriving through the night with the steady persistence of someone who is not actually worried but wants to look like they are. Just want to make sure you're doing okay. You must be so stressed. I'm here. Let me know if there's anything you need, anything at all. He read through them with different eyes than he'd had 12 hours ago. He thought about what Claire had said. She found you on purpose. He thought about Victoria at that conference in New York, appearing at his elbow with a drink and a question about his company. He had thought he was the one who had pursued her. He had been so certain of that, had even privately congratulated himself on it, in the particular way of men who believe their own desire is always the cause and never the effect. He had been so sure he had chosen her. He looked at the texts. Let me know if there's anything you need, anything at all. What she needed, he understood now, was information. She needed to know what Claire had found. She needed to know how much Nathan knew. She needed to know how much time she had. These texts were not concern. They were reconnaissance. He set the phone down. He did not respond to any of them. At 7:15, a man from Douglas's office arrived at the hospital, a young associate with careful eyes who took the documents without asking questions. Nathan hadn't authorized, gave him a signed receipt, and left. Nathan watched him go and felt the weight of the thing shift slightly from his hands to the hands of people who knew what to do with it. At 8 o'clock, a NICU nurse came to take Nathan to see his son. He had not asked. He had not remembered that this was something he could do. The nurse, a woman in her 50s, with the particular brisk kindness of someone who has delivered 1,000 variations of this moment, appeared at the doorway of Claire's room and said, "Mr. Whitmore, would you like to meet your son?" Nathan stood up. He followed her down a corridor and through a set of doors and into a room that was warm and humming and full of the delicate machinery of very small lives being maintained. His son was in an incubator in the 3rd row. How was tiny? Nathan had known abstractly that premature babies were small. He had not been prepared for this small. The miniature hands, the translucent quality of the skin, the head, smaller than Nathan's fist, the chest rising and falling with a regularity that was both mechanical and miraculous. His eyes were closed. He had a small tube and a monitor lead and a tiny knitted cap that someone had placed on his head, and he was absolutely perfect and absolutely fragile. And Nathan stood in front of the incubator and stopped breathing for several seconds. "He's been stable since delivery," the nurse said from beside him. "His lungs are doing better than we expected for 34 weeks. He's a fighter." Nathan couldn't speak. He put his hand against the incubator glass. He stood there for a long time. I thought about the 14 months of documents. He thought about Marcus Webb's signature on the transfer authorizations. He thought about Victoria, her hand easy and confident reaching across the restaurant table. He thought about himself at that table drinking champagne, feeling free, and what it had cost. I thought about his son, who had arrived into the world 4 weeks too early because his mother had been under extraordinary stress and had been alone in a house and had fallen on the floor and no one had been there. He pressed his forehead against the glass. The nurse who had seen this moment in 1,000 different forms quietly stepped back and gave him room. At 9:43, Nathan's phone rang. The number was Marcus Webb. Nathan stared at it. Marcus never called before 10. Marcus was a 10 o'clock person. He had a standing rule about it, always joked about needing his 2 cups of coffee before he was functional, and Nathan had heard the joke enough times that it had become part of the furniture of their professional relationship. Marcus was calling at 9:43. Nathan picked up. "Nathan." Marcus's voice was controlled in the way of someone who has prepared what they're about to say. "I heard about Claire. I'm so sorry. How is she?" "She's going to be okay. Thank God. And the baby?" "He's doing well." "I'm so relieved." A beat. Too precise. "Listen, I don't want to add to your stress right now, but I've had a heads up from our legal team that there's some kind of inquiry being opened. I'm not sure where it's coming from or what it's about, but I wanted to give you a call personally so you didn't hear about it from someone else first." Nathan said nothing. Marcus continued. "I'm sure it's nothing, probably a routine audit inquiry. These things happen when a company reaches our size, but I figured you'd want to loop in Douglas and get ahead of any questions before the press gets a hold of it." "I already spoke to Douglas," Nathan said. A pause, very brief. A professional pause, the kind Marcus Webb was very good at, but a pause nonetheless. "Oh, good. Good, I'm glad you had him on it. When did you reach him?" "Early this morning." Another pause, longer this time. "How early?" Nathan looked at his son through the incubator glass. "Early enough," he said. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Nathan counted them the way he had counted the minutes of Claire's surgery. 4 seconds was a long time for Marcus Webb to have nothing to say. Marcus Webb always had something to say. "Well," Marcus said finally, and his voice had changed in a way that was almost imperceptible and completely unmistakable. "I'll let you get back to your family. We can talk more when things settle down." "We will," Nathan said. He ended the call. He put the phone back in his pocket. He stood in front of his son's incubator and understood with the total clarity of someone who has slept only an hour and 24 and has had every comfortable illusion stripped away exactly what was happening. Marcus Webb had called at 9:43 in the morning because someone had told him that the documents were in motion. Someone had told him that Nathan was already talking to the attorney. Someone had warned him. He thought about the string of texts from Victoria. "Let me know if there's anything you need." She had been gathering information since last night, since before Nathan had even reached the hospital. She had known that Claire found something she must have known, because Victoria was not the kind of woman who operated without intelligence, without coverage, without knowing where the risk was coming from. She had warned Marcus. And Marcus had called Nathan to take the temperature of the situation to find out exactly how much Nathan knew, how early Douglas had been involved, how much time they had. 4 seconds of silence. That was the answer he'd been given without meaning to. Not enough time. Nathan stepped away from the incubator glass. He called Douglas. "Marcus Webb just called me," he said the moment Douglas answered. "What did he say?" "He said he heard about a potential inquiry and wanted to make sure I was talking to you." Silence on Douglas's end. Then, "He called you." "At 9:43. That means—" Douglas stopped. Nathan could hear him thinking the particular quality of a very quick mind assembling pieces. "That means someone told him the documents were moving, someone with access to information about last night." "Victoria Lane. You're certain?" "I'm not certain of anything except that she texted me 11 times between 11 last night and 7 this morning, and that Marcus Webb called me at 9:43 to find out what I know." The silence on Douglas's end was different from Marcus's silence. It was the silence of someone who is not afraid, who is not calculating an exit, but who is organizing a response. "All right," Douglas said. "Here's what happens now. I've already made 2 calls this morning. The documentation Claire found is clean and contemporaneous. It wasn't assembled by someone trying to make a case. It was found by a woman going through household files, which actually makes it more credible, not less. The inquiry I referenced last night was preliminary. As of about an hour ago, it is no longer preliminary." Nathan felt the floor shift slightly under him. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means the people who needed to see what Claire found have now seen it. It means Marcus Webb is going to have a very difficult week. It means Victoria Lane and whatever structure she's built around those accounts is going to be examined very carefully by people who are very good at following money." A pause. "And it means that your company, Nathan, is going to need you to be extremely present and extremely cooperative for what comes next. Can you do that?" Nathan looked through the glass at his son, at the miniature hands, the rising chest, the knitted cap. "Yes," he said. "Good. I'll call you by noon." Nathan put his phone away. He stood there in the warmth of the NICU, and he thought about the woman in the recovery room, 2 corridors away, the woman who had found the documents, who had called him 6 times, who had kept going even when she collapsed, who had directed him to call Douglas at 5 in the morning, because every hour matters, who had from a hospital bed on anesthesia done more to protect his company than he had done in 8 months of choosing to be somewhere else. He thought about Victoria's laugh at the restaurant table. He thought about the moment the screen had gone dark. Call blocked. He thought about what it had cost. Back in Claire's room, she was awake again. She was sitting up slightly, and someone had brought her water, and she was looking out the window with the expression Nathan recognized as her thinking face, the particular focused distance of a mind working a problem. She looked at him when he came in. "You saw him," she said. "I saw him." "How is he?" "Perfect," Nathan said, and his voice broke on the word just slightly, just enough to be real. "He's absolutely perfect." Something moved across Claire's face. Not the forgiveness he didn't deserve, not the warmth he had no right to expect, just something human and honest, a mother hearing that her child was all right, and feeling it, and letting herself feel it despite everything else in the room. "Marcus Webb called me," Nathan said. She refocused immediately. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know what I knew, how early I'd talked to Douglas." "What did you tell him?" "I told him early enough." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then something almost imperceptible happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one that had decided against arriving. "Good," she said. Nathan sat in the chair beside her bed. Neither of them spoke for a while. The monitors kept their rhythm. Somewhere down the corridor, the hospital moved through its ordinary morning. "Douglas said the inquiry is no longer preliminary," Nathan said. Claire nodded. She had already expected this. "He said the documentation you found—" Nathan stopped. Started again. "He said it was actually more credible because of how you found it, because it wasn't assembled, because it was just there, in the filing cabinet, because you were just looking for the car insurance." Claire looked at her hands. "I was looking for the car insurance," she said. "I know. I wasn't trying to investigate anyone. I wasn't looking for anything. I just opened the wrong folder." "I know, Claire." She looked up at him then, fully at him the way she had looked at him in the early years, the way that always made him feel like he was being read by someone who was not going to be fooled, but was not going to use what they found to harm him either. Just read, accurately and completely. "You have a lot of work ahead of you," she said. "I know. And I'm not talking about the company." He held her gaze. "I know," he said again, and this time the word meant something different, something larger and more uncomfortable and more true. His phone buzzed on the chair beside him. Victoria again. Nathan, I'm starting to get a little worried. Can you just let me know you're okay? He looked at the message. He looked at Claire, who had turned back to the window and was thinking her sideways thoughts about things he could not see yet. He turned his phone over and set it down. In an office across the city, Marcus Webb was on the phone with a lawyer whose number he paid a great deal of money to have. In an apartment in the Back Bay Victoria Lane was sitting with her own phone and her own attorney's number, and the particular cold focus of someone who is prepared for a situation like this and is now deciding exactly when to deploy what she has prepared. And in a NICU 2 corridors away, a boy who had arrived 4 weeks too early because his mother had been under impossible stress was breathing steadily, his tiny chest rising and falling, his miniature hands curled against his chest, fighting with everything he had, the way his mother had fought, the way she was still fighting even now from a hospital bed, directing the response to a crisis she had not caused and had tried to prevent. Nathan thought about the silence he had chosen. I thought about how loud it had become. He picked up Douglas's earlier notes. The man had faxed a summary to the hospital business office, and a nurse had brought it up, and he began to read through them carefully, the way Claire had read through the documents in the kitchen, which was to say, without panic, without rushing, looking for the shape of the thing before deciding how to move. He was just beginning to understand that this was something she had always known how to do, and that he was only now in this room at this particular cost beginning to learn it. Douglas Park arrived at the hospital at 11:58, 2 minutes before he said he would, which was exactly like Douglas. The man treated punctuality as a moral position. He came in with a leather briefcase and a younger colleague named Renata Voss, who had the kind of eyes that missed nothing, and wrote everything down in a notebook with a dark green cover that she kept open on her knee the entire time. Nathan met them in a small conference room. The hospital had made available the kind of room that existed for exactly these conversations, for the moments when families needed to talk about things that couldn't happen in a corridor. Douglas sat down, opened his briefcase, and did not waste time. "Here is where we are," he said. The Federal Financial Crimes Unit received a referral this morning based on the documentation Claire found. That referral came from my office with Claire's authorization, which she gave me at 5:42 this morning by phone. He paused. "Your wife was on the phone with me 40 minutes after coming out of surgery." Nathan absorbed this without expression. "The referral was accepted," Douglas continued, "which means this is no longer a company internal matter and no longer something that Marcus Webb or Victoria Lane can manage quietly. The window for quiet management closed this morning." "What does that mean for the company?" Nathan asked. "It means the company is going to be examined. Everything. Accounts, authorizations, communications. It will be disruptive and it will be public, and there will be a period, probably several months, during which your name is going to be attached to a story you didn't write." Douglas looked at him directly. "The question investigators are going to need to answer is whether you knew, and the answer to that question, based on everything I have seen so far, is that you did not." "I didn't." "I believe you. The documentation supports you. Claire's voicemails to you, the ones you didn't answer, actually help you, Nathan, because they establish a timeline in which your wife was trying to reach you with information you clearly didn't have." He paused. Her neighbor, Patricia Osman, also spoke to a detective this morning. She confirmed that she found Claire alone, that Claire was trying to reach you, and that Claire specifically said you had blocked her number. The room went quiet. Renata Voss wrote something in the green notebook. "That's going to be in the record," Douglas said. "Not cruelly, just factually. I'm telling you now so you're not surprised later." Nathan nodded. "Now," Douglas said, and his voice changed slightly, became the voice he used when he was moving from overview to detail, from the map to the territory. "Tell me everything you know about Victoria Lane, from the beginning. Don't skip anything because you think it's irrelevant. Let me decide what's relevant," Nathan told him. It took 40 minutes. He told Douglas about the conference in New York, about the first dinner which he had told himself was professional, and known in the part of himself he wasn't consulting that it wasn't, about the 8 months, about the access she had to his calendar, his contacts, his general awareness of the company's position. About the way she had inserted herself gradually into the spaces of his life, not pushing, never pushing, just being there reliably and conveniently there, in a way that he now understood had been entirely engineered. He told Douglas about the restaurant, About the phone. About Victoria picking it up and pressing block with the easy confidence of someone who knew what she needed to happen next. Renata Voss wrote continuously. When Nathan finished, Douglas was quiet for a moment. The timing of the block is important, Douglas said finally. Victoria knew that Claire had found something we don't yet know how she knew, but she knew. Blocking your number at that specific moment was not impulse. It was risk management. She needed you unreachable while she and Marcus handled the next phase. What was the next phase? Nathan asked. Based on what we're seeing in the transfer records, the next phase was a final movement of assets, a consolidation into accounts that would have been very difficult to trace once the money was in them. It was probably scheduled for this week. The inquiry and Claire's documents interrupted it. Douglas closed a folder. Your wife stopped it. By finding what she found by calling you and ultimately by calling me, she stopped it. Nathan put his hands flat on the table. He thought about Victoria's laugh at the restaurant, sharp and champagne-soaked. He thought about the way she had held up the phone so he could see Claire's name, like she was showing him something mildly amusing. Like his wife calling 6 times was a punchline to a joke. Nathan hadn't understood he was inside. I want to know something, Nathan said. Did she was any of it real? Any of the 8 months? Douglas looked at him. That's not a legal question, Douglas said. I know. I'm asking anyway. Douglas was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who trafficked in comfortable untruths, which was why Nathan had trusted him for years, which was why Claire had called him. Based on what I know about how this was structured, Douglas said carefully, Victoria Lane invested 8 months of her life into a position that she expected to pay out several $1 million. People who do that are not doing it for the company. They are doing it for the outcome. He paused. Make of that what you will. Nathan made of it what it was. He thanked Douglas. He thanked Renata Voss, who closed the green notebook. He walked them to the elevator and then stood in the corridor for a moment by himself, in the particular way of a man who needs 30 seconds of nothing before he can continue. His phone buzzed. Victoria. Nathan. I really need to hear from you. I'm worried about you. Please just call me when you get a chance. He read it. I thought about everything Douglas had just told him. He thought about risk management. He thought about the window for quiet management closing this morning. He called her. She answered on the first ring, which told him something. People who are genuinely worried answer on the first ring. People who are waiting for a specific call also answer on the first ring. Nathan. Her voice had exactly the right texture. Warm, slightly relieved, carefully, not overdoing it. I've been so worried. How is Claire? How's the baby? They're both okay, he said. Claire's stable. The baby's in the NICU. Thank God. I've been thinking about you all night. He let that sit for a second. Victoria, he said, I need to ask you something. Of course, anything. How did you know Claire had found something last night? Silence. Not the natural silence of someone caught off guard, the controlled silence of someone deciding which door to open. I don't know what you mean, she said. You knew, Nathan said, when you blocked her number. You knew she wasn't calling because she was upset or lonely. You knew what she had found. That's why you wanted the phone. Nathan, I think the stress of last night is Victoria. He said her name the way you say something you've finally decided to stop pretending about. Marcus called me this morning, at 9:43. That's not a coincidence. The silence this time was different. I want you to hear what I'm saying, Nathan continued. I've already spoken to Douglas. The documentation Claire found is already with federal investigators. The transfers, the shell companies, Laneway Holdings, Vesta Capital, all of it. It's already in motion, and it's already too late to move anything. He heard her breathing change, just slightly. I think, Victoria said, and her voice had shifted. Now the warmth gone something more precise and more cold in its place. The voice she used when she stopped performing, that you should speak to your attorney before you say anything else. I have spoken to my attorney, Nathan said. That's what I've been telling you. Then I think I should speak to mine. You probably should, Nathan said. He ended the call. He stood in the corridor and felt something settle in his chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but the specific feeling of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself about something and is now standing in the full weight of the truth. He had been used. He had been positioned and managed and kept comfortably distracted while money moved through his company in the dark. He had been chosen not because he was remarkable, but because he was accessible, a man with enough ego to be flattered and enough distraction to miss what was right in front of him. And he had done Victoria's job for her by ignoring the only person who was actually on his side. He walked back toward Claire's room. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Nathan's mother arrived. Eleanor Whitmore was 68 years old and had the particular energy of a woman who has survived enough to know that survival is an active choice you make every morning. She had driven 2 hours from Providence, and she came through the door of Claire's room with a casserole dish covered in foil because Eleanor Whitmore believed that food was the appropriate response to any crisis, that the body's needs did not pause for catastrophe, and that showing up with something warm was the only honest thing you could do for a person in pain. She set the dish on the windowsill. She looked at Claire. She sat on the edge of the bed and took Claire's hand in both of hers and said, "You brave, brave girl," in a voice so low and so certain that Nathan, standing in the doorway, felt something crack open behind his sternum. Claire, who had been holding herself with the composed dignity of someone who has decided not to spend emotional energy on things she cannot control, looked at Eleanor's face, and her eyes went bright for just a moment, the brightness of someone who has been strong for so long that kindness lands like a shock. "He's beautiful," Claire said. "The baby. I saw him. The nurse took me." She squeezed Claire's hand. "He looks like you." Claire almost smiled. Almost. Eleanor stood up and looked at Nathan. Nathan had not spoken to his mother since the night before, had not had the capacity to manage anyone else's reaction to what was happening while he was still managing his own. Eleanor looked at him the way mothers look at sons who have done something terrible, not with anger exactly, not yet, but with a knowledge that settled into her expression like sediment. "She called you 6 times, Eleanor said. "Mom, I'm not asking, I'm saying." Her voice was not raised. It was worse when Eleanor's voice was not raised. "She called you 6 times and you didn't answer." "I know." "And then she was on the floor by herself." "I know, Mom." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You know what your father used to say? He used to say the measure of a man isn't what he does when things are easy. It's what he does when someone needs him at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night." She picked up her purse. "I'm going to go sit with the baby for a while. You two need to talk." She left. The room was very quiet. Claire was looking at the window. Nathan sat in the chair beside her bed. "She's not wrong," Claire said. "No," Nathan agreed. "I'm not going to do this now," Claire said. "Whatever this conversation is supposed to be, I'm not doing it from a hospital bed 2 days after surgery. I need to be on my feet for it." "Okay, but I want you to understand something." She turned to look at him. "I'm not angry at you for having an affair. I mean, I am. I will be. But that's not what I keep coming back to." She paused, organizing her thoughts the way she always organized her thoughts from the inside out. "What I keep coming back to is the phone. The fact that she picked up your phone and you let her. The fact that you sat there and you let her block my number because you wanted one night without having to think about me." Her voice was absolutely steady. "That's the part I don't know how to come back from yet. Not the affair. The erasure." Nathan didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "I wasn't calling because I needed you," Claire continued. "I was calling because I was trying to save something that was yours, your company, your name, your future, and you let her erase me like I was an inconvenience." She looked at her hands. "So whatever we do next, and I don't know yet what that is, I need you to hold that. Not for my sake, for yours, because you need to understand what you did before you can understand what it costs." Nathan held it. He held all of it, the phone, the button, the laugh, the champagne, and he let himself feel exactly how heavy it was. At 4:30, Marcus Webb was taken in for voluntary questioning. Douglas texted Nathan the news with a single line, "Webb is cooperating, moving fast now." Nathan showed Claire the text. She read it, nodded, said nothing. At 5 o'clock, a different nurse came to take them both to the NICU, a new arrangement since Claire was now mobile enough to make the trip in a wheelchair. Nathan pushed the wheelchair. Neither of them spoke in the corridor. They stopped in front of the incubator. Claire leaned forward. She put her hand flat against the glass, and the gesture was so similar to what Nathan had done that morning, the same instinct, the same reaching for contact across the impossible barrier, that something about it undid him completely. He looked at his wife's hand on the glass. He looked at his son. He thought, "I nearly didn't have this." Not nearly lost it. Nearly never had it, because if the money had moved when Victoria and Marcus planned, if the accounts had been consolidated, If the investigation had started without the context of Claire's documentation, Nathan's name would have been on those authorizations. His company, his signature by proximity, his ruin built from the inside by people he had trusted and distracted, by a woman he had chosen over everything that mattered. Claire would have been alone, not just on that kitchen floor, but in everything that came after. He pressed his hand against the glass beside hers. They stood there together. Their son breathed. At 6:47 in the evening, Douglas called again. "Victoria Lane's attorney contacted my office an hour ago," Douglas said. "She's prepared to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced exposure agreement." Nathan said, "She's going to testify. Against Marcus Webb primarily, but yes, she's going to tell investigators everything, the structure, the timing, the plan." A pause. "Nathan, there's something you need to hear. Something that came out in the preliminary conversation between her attorney and the investigators. Tell me." "Victoria Lane did not approach you randomly in New York. The conference was targeted. She and Webb had been planning the final phase of the transfers for months, and they needed cover. They needed someone in the company above Webb's level whose credibility could absorb questions if the transfers were ever found. You were identified specifically because your name was on the subsidiary accounts and because you were—" Douglas paused. "Because you were considered someone who could be managed." Nathan let that land. Considered someone who could be managed. "She profiled you," Nathan said. "Her attorney's words were that she identified you as a viable relationship candidate, which is attorney language for yes. 8 months, the conference in New York, the drink at his elbow, the question about his company, the warmth that arrived exactly when he needed it and never asked anything he wasn't willing to give." He thought about the moment at the restaurant. "I thought she needed the phone blocked. She needed the warning not to reach me. She timed it." "Douglas," he said, "the night at the restaurant, when she blocked Claire's number. She knew that was the night." "We believe so. Based on what we're seeing in the transfer timeline, a final authorization was scheduled for the following business day. Webb needed one more signature, one that would look like a routine operational approval from the CEO level. If Claire had reached you that night, if you'd gone home and looked at those documents, the authorization would never have happened. The authorization would never have happened, which meant Victoria had not blocked the number on impulse. She had blocked it because it was the last night that mattered, because the next 24 hours were the window they needed, because Claire calling was not an inconvenience, it was a threat to the entire operation, and Victoria had eliminated it, with a smile, with champagne, with the practiced ease of someone who had been managing Nathan Whitmore for 8 months and knew exactly which button to push to keep him looking in the wrong direction. "I'm going to need you to come in tomorrow morning," Douglas said. "There'll be investigators present. It'll be a long day." "I'll be there," Nathan said. He went back to Claire's room. She was sitting up in bed with her phone reading something. She looked up when he came in. "Douglas called," Nathan said. "I heard you in the corridor." She set the phone down. "How bad?" "She profiled me. The conference in New York. The whole 8 months was a setup. They chose me specifically because—" He stopped. He made himself say it. "Because they thought I was someone who could be managed." Claire looked at him. She did not say "I know." She did not say "I figured." She did not perform vindication or collapse into it. She said, "Are you okay?" And the question, the complete genuine simplicity of it, coming from the woman in the hospital bed who had every right in the world to say something else, hit Nathan somewhere so fundamental that he had to look away for a moment. "No," he said honestly. "Not really." "Okay," Claire said. "That's honest." He sat down. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know that whatever the answer is, I can hear it." She waited. "When you found the documents, when you understood what they were, what did you feel?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "I felt afraid," she said. "Not for myself, for you, for what it meant for everything you'd built." She paused. "And then I felt something I'm not proud of." "What?" "Relieved," she said quietly. "For just a second, I felt relieved, because I'd known something was wrong for months, and I hadn't been able to name it, and suddenly there it was named. Real. Visible." She looked at her hands. "And then I felt terrible for being relieved, and then I picked up the phone and called you." Nathan absorbed this. The 6 calls made even more sense now, not just urgency about the company, but the particular desperation of a person who has been invisible for a long time and has suddenly found a moment where being seen matters more than anything. She had called him because she needed him to see her, to see what she'd found, what she'd been carrying, what she'd been doing quietly and without credit for years. He had blocked her number. At 9:15 that evening, Patricia Osman appeared in the doorway again. She had a paper bag from the Thai place 2 blocks from the hospital because she had correctly identified that neither Nathan nor Claire had eaten a real meal, and she was the kind of woman who handled that. She set the bag on the side table. She looked at Nathan. "I spoke to a detective today," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "Douglas told me. Thank you." "I told them the truth," she said simply. "That's all I did." She looked at Claire. Her expression changed, became something between fierce and tender, the face of someone who has decided that this particular woman is worth protecting. "You need to eat," Patricia said to Claire. "Both of you. Whatever else is happening, you need to eat." They ate. It was the most ordinary thing that had happened in 2 days, sitting in a hospital room eating Thai food out of containers. Patricia in the chair by the door, Nathan beside Claire's bed, and the ordinariness of it was its own kind of mercy. At 10:40, after Patricia had left and Claire had fallen asleep, Nathan sat in the chair beside the bed with the day arranged around him like wreckage. He thought about what Douglas had said, considered someone who could be managed. I thought about what Claire had said, the erasure. He thought about his son in the NICU breathing with new lungs that hadn't quite finished growing, fighting his way into a world that had nearly arranged itself very badly before he arrived. I thought about a woman who had spent 8 months cultivating his trust, his distraction, his availability, who had identified him as a viable relationship candidate, the way you identify an asset, the way you assess a tool for its usefulness, and who was now sitting with her attorney preparing to trade everything she knew about Marcus Webb for her own reduced exposure, which meant she had been prepared for this possibility all along. She had a plan for getting caught. She had prepared for the collapse before it happened. Because that was who Victoria Lane was, not a woman who loved risk, but a woman who managed it, who built exits before she needed them, who had never for a single moment been as careless as she seemed. And he had mistaken that coldness for confidence, that management for warmth, that utility for love. He looked at Claire sleeping. He looked at the fine lines of her face, the ones that had deepened in the 2 years since he'd stopped looking carefully enough to see them, and he thought about the person she was, the person she had been consistently and without fanfare through everything, the analyst who gave up a career she was exceptional at, the wife who managed his household and his assistant's calls and his RSVPs and his car insurance, the woman who found $3 million in fraud in a filing cabinet and spent her last conscious hours trying to get the information to someone who could use it, the woman who had asked him from her hospital bed if he was okay. He pressed his hands against his face. He did not sleep. At 2 a.m, his phone rang. Restricted number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Mr. Whitmore," a woman's voice, professional, precise. "My name is Special Agent Donna Reyes. I'm sorry for the hour. I'm calling because we've been in contact with your attorney and we wanted to give you direct notification before the morning. Marcus Webb has entered into a cooperation agreement. We expect to execute several actions related to Laneway Holdings tomorrow morning." A pause. "I also want you to know that based on our preliminary review, your name is not among the subjects of the investigation. You are a victim of this scheme, not a participant." Nathan closed his eyes. He pressed his free hand flat against his knee. "Thank you," he said. "We'll need your cooperation going forward. Your attorney has the details." "You'll have it. Everything." "Good. One more thing, Mr. Whitmore." Agent Reyes's voice shifted slightly, became something almost human beneath the professional surface. "The documentation your wife found and the timeline of when she found it, how she preserved it, who she contacted, and when that's the reason we're moving as fast as we are. Without that, this inquiry could have taken months to get to where it is right now." A pause. "She did an exceptional thing." Nathan looked at Claire sleeping. "Yes," he said. "She did." He ended the call. He sat in the silence of the hospital room for a long time. Victoria had profiled him, had chosen him, had spent 8 months maintaining the performance of someone who thought he was exceptional, had blocked his wife's number on the last night that mattered, smiling while she did it, certain she had managed the risk. But she had not profiled Claire, had not calculated Claire, what Claire would find, what Claire would do, how far Claire would go, how strong Claire would be, even on the kitchen floor, even in the ambulance, even coming out of anesthesia at 5 a.m. Victoria had underestimated the wrong person, and that miscalculation, that single fatal failure to account for the woman she had dismissed as Nathan's needy, emotional, inconvenient wife, was the thing that had undone everything. Nathan sat in the chair. His son was breathing in the NICU. His wife was sleeping beside him. His company was still standing, and somewhere across the city, a woman who had spent 8 months treating him like a calculated risk was finally discovering that the thing she had most failed to calculate was the one thing that mattered. He looked at Claire's face. He thought about what she had said, the erasure. He thought about how you come back from that. He didn't know yet. But he was beginning to understand that coming back from it, really coming back, not just managing the situation, would require him to become someone significantly different from the man who had sat at that restaurant table and smiled while his wife's name disappeared from his screen. He was not sure he knew how to be that person. I was beginning to understand that he had to learn. 3 weeks after the night, everything collapsed. Nathan Whitmore moved back into the guest room of his own house. He did not ask permission. He did not announce it as a condition or a statement. He simply asked Claire quietly in the hospital on the day she was discharged whether she would prefer he stay somewhere else during her recovery. And Claire had looked at him with those eyes that never lied and said, "I need help with the baby. Stay in the guest room." That was all. No warmth, no coldness. Just the practical assessment of a woman who knew what she needed and had stopped decorating the truth for anyone's comfort, least of all his. He stayed in the guest room. He woke up at 2 in the morning, and at 4 in the morning, and at 6, because the baby they had named him Daniel, which had been Claire's grandfather's name, and which Nathan had agreed to without hesitation, understanding that he was not currently in a position from which he should be arguing about names, came home from the NICU after 11 days, and immediately made clear that he intended to assert his presence in the household with maximum volume. Nathan changed diapers. He warmed bottles. He learned over the first 2 weeks that Daniel had a specific cry for hunger and a different specific cry for everything else, and that the everything else cry could only be resolved by being held a particular way, slightly tilted with a hand supporting the back of the head, which Nathan had figured out at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday by a process of exhausted trial and error. He did not tell Claire about this discovery. He just did it. He understood in a way he hadn't before that this was the thing he had been missing for years, not the knowledge of how to do things, but the willingness to learn without being acknowledged for learning. Claire had been doing the unglamorous work of their life together without announcement for years. He was only now in the guest room of his own house beginning to understand what that actually cost a person. The investigation moved quickly. Douglas called every other day with updates that Nathan took in the kitchen, standing at the counter while Daniel slept in the carrier strapped to his chest. It had become the arrangement updates from Douglas while the baby slept on him, and there was something about the weight of the child against his chest that made the news easier to absorb. As if the realness of Daniel made the legal abstractions more manageable. As if having something that mattered this much made it possible to look at the things that were collapsing without being destroyed by them. Marcus Webb had entered a full cooperation agreement by the end of the first week. The details emerged slowly, the way these things do not all at once, but in pieces, each piece changing the shape of what Nathan understood about the 14 months he thought he had been building something. Webb had been the architect. Victoria had been the access. The scheme was elegant in the way that dishonest things sometimes are built on the assumption that no one was watching, that the subsidiary accounts were boring enough to be beneath scrutiny, that a CEO who was comfortably distracted and a CFO who was never questioned made a combination that would hold indefinitely. They had not accounted for a woman going through a filing cabinet looking for car insurance. At 10 days after the hospital, Nathan sat across from Agent Reyes in Douglas's office for 4 hours and told her everything he knew. He told her about the conference in New York, the timeline of his involvement with Victoria, the access she had had, the things he had told her without knowing he was telling her the casual disclosures of a man who had believed he was in a private relationship, who had mentioned financial timelines and board discussions and quarterly concerns over dinners he had thought were intimate. I told it all without editing. Agent Reyes took notes and asked questions, and at the end said, "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be direct with you. You were targeted by people who were very good at this. That doesn't excuse every choice you made, but the record is clear that you were a victim of a sophisticated fraud operation." "I know what choices I made," Nathan said. She looked at him, nodded once. "Yes, I think you do. He drove home from that meeting and sat in the driveway for 6 minutes before going inside because the word victim kept circling in his head and he couldn't quite decide how to carry it. He had been defrauded, yes. He had been targeted and managed and kept conveniently looking the wrong direction. All of that was true. But victim felt incomplete because victim implied passivity, and what he had been was not passive. He had actively chosen. He had chosen Victoria over a dinner, over 100 evenings, over 6 phone calls on one specific night. He had not been merely deceived. He had cooperated in his own deception by wanting it. That was the part Agent Reyes hadn't said. That was the part he sat with in the driveway. He went inside and Daniel was crying, and he picked him up and held him in the particular way, tilted hand behind the head, and the crying stopped, and Nathan stood in the kitchen in the quiet and thought this. This is what I almost gave up. This small, furious, perfect person who stops crying when I hold him right. This is what I almost never had. Claire came into the kitchen 20 minutes later, moving carefully because her body was still in recovery. She stopped when she saw Nathan with Daniel. She watched them for a moment. She said nothing. She went to the refrigerator, got water, and went back to the living room. But in that moment of watching, Nathan saw it. Just a flicker. Something that was not yet forgiveness, but was the first very small movement in that direction. The acknowledgement that he was here, that he was doing it. I didn't mention it. He just kept holding the baby. At 2 weeks after the hospital, Claire's sister Rachel arrived from Chicago. Rachel Nguyen was 42 years old and had, over the course of Claire's marriage to Nathan, developed a carefully maintained politeness toward him that everyone understood was a structural choice. The politeness of a woman who had watched her sister disappear incrementally into a marriage and had decided that maintaining access to her sister mattered more than saying what she actually thought about the husband. She arrived with 2 suitcases, announced she was staying for a month, and installed herself in the living room with an efficiency that suggested she had been waiting for the invitation for years. She looked at Nathan on her first morning there with the undisguised assessment of a woman who no longer has any reason to be polite. "I want to be clear about something," Rachel said. They were in the kitchen. Claire was upstairs with Daniel. "I'm here for Claire and for that baby. I'm not here to make this easier for you." "I know," Nathan said. "Good." She poured coffee. "Because I've been watching you do the right things for 2 weeks from 600 miles away, and I want you to understand that 2 weeks of right things doesn't balance 14 months of wrong ones." "I know that too." Rachel looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, but the recalibration of a woman who expected pushback and didn't get it. "She's not going to make this easy for you," Rachel said. "She shouldn't. She's going to take a long time. She should take as long as she needs." Rachel set her coffee cup down. She looked at him the way his mother had looked at him in the hospital, with the knowledge that had settled in and the question of whether it was going to change anything. "Why are you still here?" she asked. Not hostilely, genuinely. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Because this is where I should be," he said. "Because she's in there and Daniel's in there, and this is where I should have been the whole time." He paused. "And because running away from what I did would be the easiest thing, which is probably a sign it's the wrong thing." Rachel picked up her coffee. She didn't say anything else, but she stopped looking at him like he was something to be managed. The company news broke publicly at 3 weeks. A financial journalist in Boston had the story first. Not the full story, but enough of it to make the headline, "Whitmore Technology CFO at Center of Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Investigation." Nathan's name was in the 3rd paragraph, described as a cooperating witness. The article was careful. Douglas had been careful. But careful articles still appeared on screens, and people still read them, and Nathan watched his phone fill up with messages from colleagues and competitors and people he hadn't spoken to in years, all of them expressing some version of concern that contained somewhere in its understructure the satisfaction of a person witnessing someone else's fall. He read none of them. He read the article once noted that Claire's name was not mentioned anywhere in it and set his phone face down. That afternoon he went to the office for the first time since the hospital. The company had been under the management of its 2 other senior directors during his absence. They met with him in the conference room, Diane Park and Tobias Reyes, both of whom had been with the company for 7 years, and both of whom had the expressions of people who have been holding things together under pressure and are relieved to have the primary person back, and also not entirely sure how they feel about him. "Where are we?" Nathan asked. Diane talked for 20 minutes. The operational picture was stable. The financial review had identified the accounts connected to the fraud and frozen them. The transfers that hadn't been completed, the final consolidation that would have happened the morning after the restaurant had been stopped before they executed. The net damage to the company was significant but survivable. The clients were nervous but had not walked. The board was waiting. "The board wants a meeting," Tobias said. "This week." "Schedule it," Nathan said. "I'll be there. They're going to ask hard questions." "Good. I'm going to answer them." Diane and Tobias exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Nathan saw the look. "What?" "Nothing," Diane said. "Diane." She set down her pen. "Some of the board members are wondering if this company needs new leadership, at the top." She said it carefully, professionally, but she said it which meant she was the kind of person who still believed honesty was a professional value, which was, Nathan thought, exactly the kind of person he needed around him. "That's a fair question," Nathan said. "You're not going to fight it." "I didn't say that. I said it's a fair question." He leaned forward. "I'm going to fight for this company, but I'm going to fight by being exactly what this company needs, which means I'm going to stand in front of that board and tell them the truth about everything, what happened, what I missed, what I should have seen, and what I'm going to do differently. And then I'm going to let them decide." He paused. "If they want new leadership after that, I'll accept it. But they're going to make that choice with complete information." Diane looked at him for a long moment. "That's different," she said. "Yes," Nathan agreed. "I'm trying to be." The board meeting was on a Thursday 3.5 weeks after the hospital. Nathan prepared for it the way he had not prepared for anything in years, the way Claire prepared for things from the inside out, starting with the most uncomfortable truths and working outward. He wrote out longhand everything he knew about what had happened, everything he had missed, every conversation with Victoria that he could reconstruct, every moment where a different choice would have produced a different outcome. He did not show the document to anyone. He just wrote it. It took 2 evenings. When he finished, he understood for the first time the full shape of what had happened, not just the fraud, but the condition that had made the fraud possible. His absence from his own life, the vanity that had made him easy to flatter, the selfishness that had let him interpret Claire's competence as neediness and his own neglect as freedom. The man he had been walking around being for years without quite knowing it. He read what he'd written. He sat with it for a long time. Then he went upstairs and looked in on Daniel, who was sleeping in his crib, with his arms thrown wide, with the complete physical abandon of someone who has never learned yet to hold himself small. And Nathan stood in the doorway and thought, he is going to grow up and watch how I treat his mother. He is going to learn what a man is from watching me. Whatever I am for the next 20 years, that's what he's going to think a man is. The thought rearranged something in Nathan's chest, permanently. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Nathan stood up in front of 12 people who had invested in his company and his vision and his name, and he told them everything. Not the legal summary, not the managed version, everything. He told them what kind of man he had been. He told them what he had missed and why he had missed it. He told them about the phone call he had blocked and what it had cost. He told them that his wife, whose name he asked permission to use, which surprised 3 of the board members, visibly had preserved the company they were sitting in by finding a filing folder while looking for car insurance, by calling 6 times, by calling Douglas at 5 in the morning, by directing events from a hospital bed on the day after major surgery. He told them that the smartest person in the room in this entire situation had been Claire Whitmore. "If you want new leadership," he said at the end, "I understand. I have not been the leader this company deserved. I have not been the partner my team deserved. I have not been the husband my wife deserved." He paused. "Let it sit. But I am standing in front of you today as the person who knows this company from the ground up, who built it from nothing, who understands what it can be, and who has just gone through the most clarifying experience of his life. So I'm asking for the chance to lead it the way it should have been led from the beginning." The room was very quiet. A board member named Gerald Holt, 70 years old, the kind of man who had seen every variety of human failure and success and had long since stopped being surprised by either, leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore," Gerald said, "I've been in business for 45 years. I've sat through a lot of presentations. I want to ask you one question." "Go ahead." "Does your wife know you just told 12 people she was the smartest person in the room?" Nathan almost smiled. "No, sir, not yet." Gerald leaned back. "Tell her. Whatever else happens, tell her." The board voted to retain Nathan's leadership by 9-3. He drove home slowly. He sat in the driveway for 3 minutes. He went inside. Claire was in the living room with Daniel and Rachel. Rachel looked up when Nathan came in and read something in his face and said without ceremony, "I'm going to go make tea," and took herself out of the room with the discretion of a woman who understands when she is not needed. Nathan sat on the couch across from Claire. Daniel was asleep on her chest. She had one hand on his back, moving in the slow circles that had become automatic. "The board kept me on," Nathan said. "I know. Douglas texted me." Of course he had. "I told them about you," Nathan said. "What you did, how you found the documents, what you did with them." Claire looked at him. "I told them you were the smartest person in the room," he said, "in the whole situation." She was quiet for a moment. "Was that for them or for me?" she asked. "For me," he said honestly. "I needed to say it out loud in front of people. I needed to say it like it was a fact, because it is a fact, and I've been—" He stopped. "I've been treating you like you were a footnote for a long time. And you were the whole story." The room was very quiet. Daniel breathed on her chest. "Nathan," Claire said. "Yeah. I'm not ready to forgive you. I know. And I'm not going to pretend that what you said at a board meeting fixes what happened in that kitchen. I'm not asking you to." She looked at him. "But—" A pause, just a breath. "I heard what you said, and I want you to know that I heard it." He nodded. They sat in the quiet for a while, the three of them, Nathan on one couch, Claire on the other, Daniel between them, in the way that children are between their parents, the physical manifestation of every reason to try. At 5 weeks after the hospital, Victoria Lane's cooperation agreement became public. The details were worse than Nathan had known. The profiling had started not 8 months ago, but 11 before the New York conference, before the first meeting, before the drink at his elbow, and the question about his company. Victoria and Webb had researched him for 3 months before she walked up to him. They had studied his patterns, his vanity, his marriage. They had identified the distance between Nathan and Claire as the entry point. They had calculated that a man who was emotionally absent from his wife would be emotionally hungry enough elsewhere to be predictable. They had been right. He read the public filing at the kitchen counter at 6 in the morning with Daniel asleep in the carrier against his chest. He read the part that described him as emotionally absent from his marriage. He read it twice. He thought a federal document, in the public record, emotionally absent. "I thought I did this. Not just the affair. The whole condition that made the affair possible. The years of treating Claire like managed background while he performed success for everyone who wasn't her. The systematic devaluation of a woman who was worth more than everything else in his life combined." Daniel stirred against his chest. Nathan put his hand on the small back. The baby settled. At 6 weeks, Claire went back to work. Not to Nathan's company. To her own thing, something she had been building quietly for months in the background of everything else, with the particular focused energy of a woman who has decided to stop building things for other people and start building something of her own. She had been in contact with her former mentor at the private equity firm, a woman named Dr. Susan Hale, who had watched Claire leave the firm years ago and had never quite forgiven Nathan for it, though she'd been too professional to say so. Susan had been waiting, not actively, but in the way that people who recognize exceptional talent wait with patient certainty that eventually the exceptional person will find their way back. Claire was finding her way back. She had structured a small consulting practice working from home, initially focused on financial compliance and fraud prevention for mid-sized companies. The irony was not lost on her. She had found the fraud, and now she was building a business on preventing it. Patricia Osman, who had turned out to have a background in corporate governance that Claire hadn't known about, joined her as an informal advisor. The first client signed at the end of month 2, the second signed a week later. By month 3, she had 5. Nathan watched this from the guest room of his own house, which he still occupied because Claire had not asked him to leave and had not asked him to stay closer. He watched Claire's business take shape the way he had once watched his own, with the recognition of someone who knows what it looks like when a person is building something real. He did not offer advice. He made dinner. He took night shifts with Daniel without being asked. He learned to be present in the small ways, the ways that don't announce themselves, that don't require acknowledgement, that just quietly reduce the weight another person is carrying. He was learning what Claire had known how to do for years. At 4 months after the hospital, Marcus Webb was formally charged. The charges were significant. His attorney had negotiated as much as could be negotiated, which was not much. Victoria Lane received a reduced charge in exchange for her full cooperation. Her attorney had been good. But the agreement, when its terms became public, contained a detail that Nathan read and reread at the kitchen counter. Victoria Lane had been required to return all assets traceable to Laneway Holdings and Vesta Capital. All of them. The lifestyle she had built, the apartment, the vehicle, the travel, the 4 million followers who had followed an image that had never quite existed, was subject to asset recovery. The 4 million followers did not follow someone who had lost everything. They followed someone who appeared to have everything. Without the appearance, the following evaporated. Nathan read the asset recovery notice and felt not satisfaction, but something quieter and more complicated, the feeling of watching a structure built on illusion meet the reality of gravity. Victoria had chosen a life built on someone else's wealth and someone else's credibility, and now both of those things were gone, and what remained was a woman he suspected he had never actually met, because the woman he had known had never been quite real. He closed the browser. I went to Daniel's room. His son was awake, lying on his back, looking at the ceiling with the absolute absorption of a 4-month-old, discovering that the world is full of visual information. His arms moved in the imprecise, enthusiastic way of someone who has not yet figured out that arms can be directed, but is deeply committed to trying. Nathan sat on the floor beside the crib. He put his finger against the bars. Daniel's hand closed around it immediately, with the grip strength that always surprised him. This small person, this 4-month-old, who had arrived 4 weeks too early, and had fought his way to full health with the same quiet stubbornness that characterized his mother, holding on with everything he had. "Hey, buddy," Nathan said quietly. Daniel looked at the ceiling. "I'm going to tell you something," Nathan said. "I'm going to tell you now while you're too young to understand it, because by the time you're old enough to understand it, I want it to already be true." He paused. "Your mother is the most remarkable person I've ever known, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you see what that looks like, a man who understands what he has and treats it like it matters. I'm going to make sure you never have to learn what I learned the hard way." Daniel's grip tightened on his finger. Nathan stayed on the floor until the baby fell asleep. At 5 months after the hospital, Claire knocked on the guest room door. Nathan was reading. He said, "Come in." She stood in the doorway. She was wearing the old sweater she'd had since before they were married, the dark green one with the slightly frayed cuffs, and her hair was down, and she looked like the woman he had married, and also like someone he was only now beginning to meet. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay. I've been talking to Susan Hale, and to my therapist, and to Rachel." She paused. "And I've been talking to myself, which is the conversation that matters most." She looked at the doorframe for a moment. "I'm not where I was. I'm not who I was when this started, and I don't know yet what that means for us. I genuinely don't know, and I'm not going to pretend I do." She looked at him. "But I know that you have been here. Every morning and every night shift and every meeting you've shown up for when you didn't have to. I see it." Nathan set his book down. "And I think," Claire continued, "that you should move out of the guest room." He stared at her. "Not because I've forgiven everything," she said. "I haven't. And not because things are okay, because they're not fully okay yet, but because sleeping down the hall from me is not where you live. And if you're going to be here, if we're going to try to figure out what being here means, then you should be here." Nathan stood up from the chair. He stood in front of her. He thought about 6 phone calls and a blocked number and a restaurant and a laugh that had not been kind. He thought about a kitchen floor and an ambulance and a woman who had kept going even when she had every reason to stop. He thought about a boardroom where he had said the truest thing he'd said in years. He thought about a small hand closing around his finger with grip strength that refused to let go. "Claire," he said. "Don't make it a speech," she said. He almost smiled. "Okay," he said. She nodded. She turned and went back down the hall. Nathan stood in the guest room doorway and looked at the life he had nearly destroyed, the house, the quiet, the evidence of a family rebuilding itself, one careful day at a time, and he understood in the bone-deep way of someone who has finally stopped pretending that this was the moment. Not the dramatic one, not the restaurant or the hospital or the boardroom. This moment, a doorway, a woman in a green sweater saying, "Be here." This was what love actually looked like. Not the champagne version, the real one. He picked up his book. He moved down the hall. Daniel Whitmore turned 1-year-old on a Saturday in October, and Claire baked the cake herself. Not because she had to. Rachel had offered. Patricia had offered. Eleanor had called twice from Providence, volunteering to drive up and take over the entire production. But Claire had wanted to do it herself, had needed to do it herself in the way that certain acts of ordinary love become declarations. A woman standing in her kitchen making a birthday cake for her son, choosing the life she was building over the life that had been done to her. Nathan sat at the kitchen counter and watched her work, and did not offer to help, because he had learned over the past year the difference between helping and intruding. He got her the eggs when she asked for them. He kept Daniel occupied in the high chair with a set of stacking rings that Daniel was destroying with focused, joyful incompetence. He stayed in his lane. He had been learning slowly, and with the particular difficulty of a man who had spent years believing his instincts were always correct, that staying in his lane was not a diminishment. It was a form of respect. "He's going to put that in his mouth," Nathan said, watching Daniel examine a red ring with intense scientific interest. "He puts everything in his mouth," Claire said without looking up. "It's developmentally appropriate." "Is it appropriate when it's been on the floor?" "Nathan, I'm not saying anything. You're saying something." He picked up the ring from where Daniel had dropped it, wiped it on his shirt, handed it back. Daniel received it with the solemn gratitude of someone who has been given exactly what he required. Claire glanced over at them. For just a second, her expression did something it was doing more frequently now, something that was not quite the old warmth, not the warmth from before everything, but something different, something that had been through more and come out the other side, and was therefore Nathan had come to understand more real than the original. Not easier, more real. She turned back to the cake. The past 7 months had not been a straight line. Nathan would have been suspicious if they had been, because straight lines in human things were usually a sign that someone was performing recovery rather than living it. There had been weeks where Claire was distant in a way that had nothing to do with logistics or Daniel or work, where she was simply gone inside herself, processing in the sideways way she processed, and Nathan had learned to hold that space without filling it. There had been a night in February where she had come downstairs at 2 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table and cried in a way she clearly hadn't planned to, in the sudden way of someone whose defenses have gone offline while they slept. And Nathan had sat across from her and not said anything useful, and not pretended that anything was fine and just been there. That was all, just there. She had gone back to bed without thanking him. He had understood that the being there was the point, not the acknowledgement. There had also been a Thursday in March when she had laughed, actually laughed at something ridiculous Daniel had done with a bowl of oatmeal, and Nathan had felt the sound of it land somewhere inside him like something coming back to life, and he had made himself not react to it, not comment on it, not make it about what he needed from it, just let it exist as its own thing. He was learning, slowly, with regular setbacks, but learning. The therapy helped. He had started seeing someone in January, a man named Dr. Philip Adler, who had the particular combination of patience and precision that Nathan had initially found infuriating and had eventually come to understand was exactly what he needed. Dr. Adler had no interest in Nathan's version of events. He was interested in the conditions, the habits of mind, the specific mechanisms by which a man could build a life with someone and then treat that person as the least important element of it. "When did you stop seeing her?" Dr. Adler asked in their second session. Nathan had started to say, "I never stopped," and then stopped himself. "Probably year 3, he said instead. "What happened in year 3? "The company started growing. I got busier. I got more external, more focused on what was happening out there than in here. And Claire handled in here. And did you notice that she was handling it? I took it for granted. That's not the same thing as noticing." Nathan had sat with that for the rest of the session. He sat with it for a long time after. The company recovered faster than the analysts predicted. Douglas had been right that the net damage was survivable, but surviving and recovering were different things, and the recovery required Nathan to be present in ways he had not been present before, not just visible, not just signing off, but genuinely engaged with every layer of the organization, with the people who had held things together during the investigation, with the clients who had stayed nervous but loyal, with the board members who had voted 9-3 and were watching to see what he did with the trust they'd extended. He showed up differently, not dramatically, not with speeches or grand gestures, just consistently the way Claire had been consistent, with the particular quiet reliability of someone who has stopped needing to be seen doing things and has started just doing them. Diane Park noticed first. She stopped having the expression of someone managing a situation and started having the expression of someone working with a colleague she trusted. Tobias Reyes started bringing him problems before they became crises, which was how Nathan learned that Tobias had been handling things on his own for years because he hadn't believed Nathan would engage with the small stuff. "You should have been bringing me these," Nathan told him, going through a set of operational reports that were more complex than they should have been. "You were usually in the middle of something," Tobias said carefully. "I'm never too in the middle of something for this. That's the job." Tobias looked at him. "Okay," Tobias said. "Good to know." It was a small moment. Nathan recognized it as the kind of moment that mattered. At 8 months after the hospital, the Wall Street Journal ran a profile on Whitmore Technologies' recovery. The journalist had asked to profile Nathan specifically, and Nathan had agreed on one condition, that the profile include the full story of what had happened, not the sanitized version. The journalist had been surprised. Profiles of this type were usually exercises in careful image management. Nathan had not wanted image management. He had wanted the truth on record. The profile ran on a Tuesday morning. Nathan read it at the kitchen counter with coffee, and when he got to the paragraph that described Claire's role, the documents, the phone calls, the hospital, the 5 a.m. call to the attorney, he set the coffee down. The journalist had called her the company's most important employee, which was not technically accurate since Claire did not work for the company and never had. But the line landed, and Nathan suspected the journalist had chosen it deliberately, and he found he did not want to correct it. Claire read the profile at her desk in the small home office where she ran her consulting practice. Nathan knew she read it because Rachel, who was back in Chicago, but maintained a text thread with Nathan that had developed organically over the months into something he would cautiously describe as friendship texted him at 9:15. She cried a little. "Don't make a big deal of it." He didn't make a big deal of it. He left a cup of tea outside her office door. She did not mention the tea. I did not mention it either. But that evening at dinner, she looked at him and said, "The journalist called me the company's most important employee." "Yeah, I don't work for the company." "I know." "Do you think she knew that—" "I think she made a choice," Nathan said. Claire considered this. "It was a good choice," she said, "and that was all. But that was enough." At 9 months, they had the conversation they had been building towards since the hospital. They had it on a Sunday evening after Daniel was asleep at the kitchen table, which had become the location for important conversations, the way kitchens become in houses where real life is lived. Claire had a glass of wine, Nathan had coffee, Rachel had gone back to Chicago, Patricia was next door. The house was quiet. Claire started it. "I need to tell you what I want," she said. "Not what I'm willing to accept, what I actually want." Nathan said, "Tell me." "I want a marriage where I'm visible," she said. "Not adored, not put on a pedestal. Visible. I want to be someone you see when you come home, not someone who manages the background of your life while you perform it for other people." She held her wine glass but didn't drink from it. "I want to build something of my own, which I'm already doing, and I want you to see that as something that matters, not as a hobby I do between your needs." "It matters," Nathan said. "I know you think it matters now. I need it to still matter in 3 years, in 7 years. I need it to matter on the nights when the company is stressful and Daniel is difficult and you're tired and it would be easier to stop paying attention." She paused. "That's when it counts. Not now when everything is a lesson. Later when the lesson starts to fade." Nathan looked at her across the table. "I can't promise you I'll be perfect," he said. "I know what I'm capable of when I stop paying attention. I've seen what it costs. But I can tell you that I am not the same person who sat at that restaurant table. Not because of what happened to me, because of what I've chosen to do with it." He paused. "And I know that saying that isn't enough. I know you need the years." "I do," she said. "Then I'll give you the years." She looked at him for a long time. "I want to try," she said. "That's what I want. I want to try for real, not manage the situation, not keep the house running, not coexist. Actually try." "So do I." "Then we try." It was not romantic. It was not the reconciliation scene from a movie with music and tears and declarations. It was two people at a kitchen table deciding with their eyes open to do something difficult because they believed it was worth doing. Nathan thought this is more real than anything that happened at that restaurant. He thought this is what I almost threw away for a performance. He thought I will remember this table for the rest of my life. Marcus Webb was sentenced in November. 14 months into the investigation, the case was resolved. Marcus received 6 years, which was reduced from the original recommendation in acknowledgement of his cooperation. His attorney argued that he had been partially manipulated by Victoria Lane, which was true, in the way that most things involving Victoria were true, technically accurate, and deliberately incomplete. Nathan learned the verdict from Douglas by text while he was at Daniel's pediatric appointment. He read it sitting in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and had a television playing children's programming, while Daniel sat on his lap and tried to eat the corner of a pamphlet about infant nutrition. 6 years. I thought about the man he had known for 9 years, the man who had been his CFO, his business partner, the person he had trusted to handle the money. He thought about how long Webb had been moving funds before Victoria came into the picture, how long the calculation had been running in the background of every meeting and handshake and business dinner. He thought about all the times Webb had looked him in the face. He took the pamphlet away from Daniel. Daniel was outraged. "I know," Nathan said. "I know." Victoria's reduced charge had resulted in a 20-month sentence suspended pending completion of community service and full asset restitution. Her attorney had been very good. The sentence had been reported in 2 lines in a financial newsletter and nowhere else, which was perhaps the most appropriate consequence for a woman who had built her entire life on visibility to disappear from the public record with barely a footnote. Nathan read the 2 lines once. He did not read them again. What he had come to understand about Victoria Lane in the months of therapy and consequence and rebuilding was that she had never been his villain in the way he'd initially cast her. She had been a person who had chosen greed over integrity consistently enough that she had stopped being able to tell the difference, and who had calculated everything in her life by its return value until she forgot that some things couldn't be calculated. She had been ruthless, and she had been clever, and she had been in the end undone by the one variable she hadn't thought to assess: the woman in the kitchen, the one she had dismissed as a complication. Nathan was finished being angry at Victoria. He was not finished being responsible for his part in it. There was a difference, and Dr. Adler had helped him find it. Claire's consulting practice crossed its first significant threshold in December, a contract with a regional financial services firm that was the largest single engagement she had landed, at a scope that meant she needed to bring on help. She hired 2 people, a young analyst named Priya, who reminded Claire in the particular way that competent young women sometimes reminded her of herself, at that age precise and underestimated, and a compliance specialist named George, who had 30 years in financial auditing and the demeanor of someone who has seen every variety of corporate wrongdoing and is no longer capable of being shocked. She told Nathan about the hires at dinner. He asked questions about the contract, real questions, the kind that indicated he had been paying attention to her work, that he understood what she was building well enough to be curious about its specifics rather than just its existence. She answered them. Then she said, "You remember the question?" He knew which question. She had asked him at the hospital whether he was okay. "I remember," he said. "Are you?" she said. "Now, not then, now." I thought about it honestly, which was something he had been practicing, the deliberate choice to answer from where he actually was, rather than where he thought he should be. "Most days," he said. "Most days I'm okay. Some days I look at what I almost threw away, and it's hard to be in that." "What do you do on those days?" "I stay anyway," he said. "That's it. I just stay." Claire picked up her fork. "That's the right answer," she said. At 1 year after the hospital, the anniversary that neither of them named aloud, but both were aware of, Nathan did something small. He came home from the office with dinner from the Thai place near the hospital, the same one Patricia had brought them in Claire's room. He set it on the kitchen table. He put Daniel in the high chair. He called Claire from her office by standing at the bottom of the stairs and saying her name normally, not shouting, not texting, just saying it. She came down. She saw the food. She looked at him. "Patricia's place," she said. "Yeah." She sat down. They ate dinner. Daniel ate mashed sweet potato with the serious focus of someone engaged in important work. Nathan watched his family at the table, his wife with her fork halfway to her mouth, animated about something Priya had done that day. his son methodically distributing sweet potato across a radius that extended well beyond the high chair tray, and he thought about the silence he had chosen, about what the silence had cost, about the specific weight of a phone going dark and a woman on a kitchen floor and a choice that had ricocheted through everything that followed. I thought about all of it, and then he let it go. Not in the sense of forgetting, not in the sense of absolution, but in the sense of a man who has looked at what he did with his eyes fully open and has chosen every day since to be different, and who has arrived at a place where the choosing is less painful because it has become more natural. He was not the man from the restaurant. He was becoming someone better. Patricia Osman came for dinner 2 weeks later, the way she did every few weeks now, having become so embedded in the fabric of their household that Daniel reached for her with the confident expectation of someone who knows he will be caught. She came in with a bottle of wine and the information that she had officially joined Claire's consulting practice as a part-time advisor, which Claire had already told Nathan, but had clearly not told Patricia that she'd told Nathan, so he performed the appropriate surprise. Rachel noticed from the text thread. She sent, "You're getting better at the face. Progress." He sent back, "Quiet." She sent, "Tell Claire I said hi and that she deserves everything good." He set his phone down and looked at the table, Patricia holding Daniel, Claire pouring wine, the ordinary, miraculous persistence of people who have decided to keep showing up, and he thought about what it had taken to get here. The cost of it. The specific price of a single night's worth of selfishness paid out over a year in consequences neither dramatic nor simple, just relentlessly real. He thought about what endured. Not the restaurant, not the champagne, not the performance of a life he had been living for everyone, but the people who mattered. This endured. The table, the people at it, the choice made daily to be present. At 14 months after the hospital, Whitmore Technology launched a new initiative, a transparency program that Nathan had built with Diane and Tobias over 6 months, designed to create accountability structures within the company that made the kind of fraud Webb and Victoria had run essentially impossible. Real-time financial oversight, anonymous reporting channels, external audit partnerships, the kind of infrastructure that honest companies had and that Whitmore Technology had not had because Nathan had trusted the wrong people and not looked closely enough at the right things. The initiative was covered in 3 industry publications. One of them quoted the program as setting a new standard for mid-sized technology company governance. Nathan read the coverage and felt something he identified after a moment of examination as pride. Not the old pride, not the pride of being seen and admired and validated, the different kind. The kind that comes from doing something that actually makes things better. The kind that doesn't need anyone to notice, though it's pleased when someone does. He called Douglas to share the news. Douglas said, "Claire told me already. She reads the trade publications. She reads everything," Douglas said. "She always has." At 15 months, Daniel said his first word. It was not mama, it was not dada, it was the word no delivered with tremendous conviction to a bowl of peas that had appeared on his high chair tray without his consent, and he said it with such absolute clarity and such complete assurance that everyone in the kitchen, Nathan, Claire, Patricia, who happened to be there, burst out laughing simultaneously, and Daniel looked around at all of them laughing with the expression of someone who has discovered that making people laugh is extremely satisfying and intends to pursue this skill. Claire laughed until she had to sit down. Nathan watched her laugh. He thought about the months he had missed of her, the years, the decade of her humor and her intelligence and her way of being exactly and entirely herself, which he had let recede into the background while he looked elsewhere for things that were cheaper and less real. He thought about how much of her he still had to learn. He was looking forward to learning it. At 18 months after the hospital, a young woman approached Claire at a business conference in Boston. She was 26, early in her career, sharp in the way of someone who has had to be sharp to get into rooms that didn't initially have space for her. She had heard Claire speak on a panel about financial compliance and corporate accountability, and she found her afterward with the specific directness of someone who has something important to say and has decided to say it. "I want to ask you something," the young woman said. "Go ahead," Claire said. "The fraud case, the one at your husband's company, the part where you found the documents." Claire waited. "Were you scared?" the young woman asked. "When you found them and you couldn't reach him and you were alone, were you scared?" Claire looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I was terrified. But you kept going. I kept going." "How?" Claire thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything from the inside out, starting with what was true and working outward. Because stopping wasn't going to change what I'd found, she said, and because I had someone to protect, the baby, my own future, the truth of what had happened. She paused. Fear is real. It doesn't have to be the loudest thing in the room. The young woman stood there for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. That's thank you." Claire went home and told Nathan about the conversation at dinner. He listened. When she finished, he said, "You should write that down somewhere." "Write what down?" "What you just said. Fear is real. It doesn't have to be the loudest thing in the room." He looked at her. "That's the whole story in one sentence." Claire considered this. "It's not the whole story," she said. "No. The whole story is what comes after the fear," she said. "It's what you do with it." Nathan nodded. "I understood." Years later, when people asked Nathan Whitmore what had changed him, the journalists, the conference audiences, the young executives who sought him out after he started speaking publicly about accountability and leadership, he always gave the same answer. He said, "I was handed everything I needed to build a real life, and I spent years treating it like background noise. And then I was given the chance to understand exactly what I had, and I took it." He never said Victoria's name in those conversations. He never said the word affair or fraud or investigation. He said, "I stopped seeing the person who mattered most. And when I started seeing her again, everything else became possible." What he did not say, because some things are too real to perform for an audience, was that the moment he most returned to the moment that had become the fixed point in his understanding of himself was not the hospital or the boardroom or the sentencing or the article or the birthday cake. It was the kitchen floor. A woman with shaking hands and a stack of documents and a phone that went straight to voicemail, calling a man who had decided for the price of one evening's freedom that her voice was not worth hearing. He thought about her choosing even then to keep going. He thought about what that took. He thought about what it meant that she was still here. Every day, he thought about what it meant that she was still here. Claire Whitmore built her practice into one of the most respected financial compliance firms in New England, and she did it the way she did everything from the inside out, starting with what was true, working outward without apology. She hired people who were smart and honest and underestimated. She built a culture that had no tolerance for the quiet wrongdoing that hides in the spaces between what is said and what is done. She taught her son with every ordinary day she showed up for what it looked like to be strong without being hard, certain without being cruel, present without being diminished. Daniel Whitmore grew up watching two people choose each other, not perfectly, not easily, but continuously, the way real choosing works day after day in the unremarkable hours that turn out to be the ones that matter. I grew up understanding, without anyone having to explain it, that the measure of a person is not what they do when things are easy. Patricia Osman at 65 became the formal head of compliance at Claire's firm and brought to the work the same qualities she had brought to everything since she'd decided in her 50s to stop spending energy on indifference, the quality of a woman who notices what matters and acts on it without waiting for permission. She had heard Claire fall through a wall. She had let herself in with a key. She had held a hand in an ambulance. She had put the documents in her bag because someone had to. Because the kind of woman she had decided to become did the thing that needed doing even when no one was asking, even when everyone else was looking somewhere else. And Nathan Whitmore, who had once pressed a button that silenced the most important voice in his life, learned to live in the consequence of that choice, not as a sentence but as a compass, a fixed point that told him every time he was tempted to look away from what mattered exactly what looking away cost. He never blocked a call again, not from Claire, not from anyone. And on the nights when Daniel was asleep and the house was quiet and Claire was reading beside him with her feet tucked under the old green sweater, Nathan would sometimes look at her and think, "I almost missed this. I almost traded this for a performance. I almost let them erase you." And the thought was never comfortable. He had decided it should never be comfortable, because the day it stopped costing something was the day he had stopped learning from it, and he intended to keep learning. For the rest of his life, he intended to keep learning, because the call he chose to ignore had taught him everything, and the woman he had tried to silence had turned out to be the loudest truth he had ever been given.